This is a light in Blender that I'm controlling with a gradient map. It's really easy. Here, add light, use nodes, normal coordinates, separate out Z into a ramp. Great job, tutorial over, goodbye! Okay, now that we're rid of the TikTok generation, we can talk about the boring stuff that actually makes a difference to your scenes. How do you make a nice shape? How do you make it shimmer a little? How do you choose a pleasing color? And how do you make it rotatable? That's right, it's not by default. If you make it all the way through, I will give you this node for free. But that is on the condition that you first learn how to make this one. So no skipping to the end. You should use this kind of light whenever you show a light's fall off. A building facade, for instance, looks great with some interesting lights, as does a sci-fi hallway. We typically use IES profiles for this, and you can download them from the internet and install them on a Blender light. But these are not adjustable, and I found a way to make an adjustable light using color ramps inside of Blender, and it's actually embarrassingly easy. I don't know why I ever put up with IES nonsense. So we'll go into rendered view, and with a light selected, we'll press use nodes in the light tab, slide over a shader editor, and you'll see here we can control the light using nodes. Fantastic. Now inside of here, we'll add a geometry node, and from the normal, pull out a separate X, Y, Z. Now the normal of the light is the coordinate system, and the Z component is the one pointing up or down, and that's what we want. Now if we preview this, we will see light pointing upward being a value of 1, and light pointing straight down will be a value of -1. Now we don't want to work with negative values. You know, that's not going to be good for us. So we'll pull this through a map range node, and we will just clamp this range from a 0 to 1 range. I will also ensure that our light never goes past 180 degrees like most normal modern light bulbs do. And if we do want to go past that, you can change the from minimum here to -1. That's going to allow you to get the coordinate system going downwards as well, but we won't be doing that for this tutorial. We'll be using this coordinate system quite a bit going forward, so I'll put that in a frame and name it coordinates. And now going out from here, we can control the light using, for instance, a color ramp. And you'll see if I adjust this and I add other points to this, you'll see it adds a point to the light. And we have finally caught up with the TikTok crowd. Now, how do we make nice looking shapes? I break it down into 4 basic shapes: the cup, the hotspot, the spike, and the ambient. When we add the 4 together, we make a complex and pleasing shape. So, to make the cup here, we want 1 black and 1 white point, and we want to reverse them. So we want the white on the outside, and we want the black on the inside. And now, just so that it doesn't go past that 180 degree point, we want to add another point right at the end, move it to the black, and then we can move this one a little bit up just to fade that out nicely. Now I feel like that fade is a bit digital, so I'll change the easing mode from linear to ease, and that'll give us a softer fall off. And now the from minimum slider will determine the spread of the cup, and the from maximum slider will determine the fading going inwards. Now I am very lazy. I know for myself that if it's hard to change something, then I probably won't change it, even if it's for the better, right? So I want to make sure that everything is as easy for me to change as possible. And let's do that here by making a component node for what I just did. So I'll select these 2 nodes and press Ctrl G on the keyboard. And then I can pin that group and slide over a new shader editor window and press Tab to go out of it. And now I can see both what's inside the group and what's outside while I adjust it. So let's rename this group to cup. And let's expose some sliders. You'll recall we used the from minimum and from maximum here, so I'll pull these into the group input, both of them, and they appear here on the node. And now I can adjust them much more easily. But to make it even more user-friendly, I'll add some sliders to it. So inside the group window, press N to open the group settings. In the group tab, we can adjust the from minimum here, which is, we can first rename it to width, which is what it represents, and the other one is, let's say, fade. And the width, we want it to be restricted from a 0 to 1 range. So the minimum will be 0, the maximum will be 1, and the subtype here, that determines how the slider looks, basically. Subtype will be a factor, because then we can get this nice looking slider. I'll do the exact same thing for the fade, which is a factor going from 0 to 1. Now what I want to be able to do here is I want to be able to daisy chain these so that I can, for instance, add more cup elements after each other. And that's not going to work right now. If I take this node here, I put one after the other, they're not going to stack predictably, right? I want them to be additive. So to do that, it's pretty easy. What we want to do is we want a separate coordinate system from what light enters it previously. I'll show you that. So this value here, this represents the z coordinate coming from the geometry node. Let's rename it to that, the coordinates. Now let's add a new input, and that's going to be the previous node. So let's just call this the light. Its default should definitely be 0. And then we should bring this to the output and add whatever this is. Let's add a mix node and add this to the previous light. Let's swap these around, because now this factor here will control how much we add this node, and that's a very useful node to have. So I'll bring that out to the input as well as the factor. And now we have a node here that we can probably stack after each other. Let's see. Let's Control-Shift-D to copy that with the coordinate system and move this light into this light and then bring it over. And then we can adjust the width of this, and there we go. We have two separate elements that stack on top of each other, and we can change the intensity of it as well. Oh, it looks like the fade actually fades away the previous one. We don't want that, and that is probably because I forgot to set this to add. And let's, in fact, not clamp the factor. Okay, let's make the next node as going to be a hotspot node, and that's very easy to make. Just do a map range node again, and preview that with Control-Shift-Left click, and we basically have a hotspot here that we can control with the from minimum slider to control the spread of it. But let's also add a float curve to it to control how the light falls off from the center going out. And what I like is to make a nice little S curve here. We want a curve that looks kind of like this. And what I'm looking for is at the end here and here, I want it to be completely flat. Flat on both of them. So let's bring this down until this looks flat and this looks flat, and we have a pleasing curve going right through the center lines like this. And now if I mute this node, pressing M on the keyboard, you can see that's before and after. I think that looks pretty nice. So let's do exactly the same thing with this as we did with the previous one. Select them, Control-G to group them. This input here will be the coordinates. Add a new one, which is the light. Which we mix color, mix into this one with an add, and expose the factor. Let's also expose the from minimum here to select the width. We can call that width. Make it a factor going from 0 to 1. Default, say 0.5. Let's turn off clamp factor. Now this node group will be named hotspot. And to check it, by the way, the output version of this one is gray, this one is yellow. That just means what kind of color space you're working in. Is it grayscale or is it RGBA? It doesn't really matter. It's a little computationally heavy to calculate red, green, blue, and alpha channels when you don't need to. So just for optimization's sake, you can go into this, you can change the color output to a float. That won't make a giant difference, but it'll make it a little easier on Blender. Now to plug this one into the light of this one, and you can see we can combine the cup with the hotspot. So let's turn down the factor of the cup, and we can turn down the width of the hotspot and turn up the factor of it. Okay, next let's make a spike. So for this one, we will do the same thing, pull it into a map range node that is, again, to control it, right? We'll do a ramp this time, and we'll make one that goes from black to white to black again. So pull this one, we can write in position 0.5 to make it go right in the middle, add a new point that's going to be black. Now, okay, let's preview this one. And this is a good start for a spike. So you'll see we have kind of two spikes, we have one going here and one going here. But we want to tighten these up quite a bit because you can't really tell that these are spikes, right? We can do that with a float curve again. Float curve. And this one, I want to make a really steep hill going to the right. And here it's very important that you don't go past the borders. If this curve goes from this point here and then down and then in again, I'll do that for you now. It goes down. Then you'll have this really harsh fall off, which is no bueno. Let's bring that one back up again. Try to get a really nice spike. If I zoom out here, this is exactly what I'm looking for. And so I can put this one into another group and do the same as with both of the other ones. I'll speed that up. And for this one, I'll also expose one more slider. Okay, that's going to be the factor of this float curve, because this factor right here controls the effect of the float curve, right? So it's going to be the spikiness. So if I turn this down, it's going to be less and less spiky until it gets to there, right? Let's pull this one also into the group input, call that spikiness. The node group will be called spikes. And to test that it works, let's take this value into the light. And actually, I changed something about this. If you go into here, I changed this input from min to from max, which I thought worked a little bit better with controlling the spread. Bring the light a little closer to the wall so it's easier to see the pattern, and that's good. Now we have that perfect spike. Now let's add the last one, which is the ambience, and the ambience it's the easiest one. It's literally just a map range node. And we want this overall kind of glow so that if we look at this, you don't ever go into complete black light here, like here. Because regular light bulbs generally don't have this sharp of a pattern. But I can control the fall off of this too with a float curve if I like, and make that kind of S shape that we had earlier, which I find helps a little bit. And this is the ambient. Add it at the very end and turn down the factor. Oh, factor's flipped. That's it. So we can turn up the factor just a little bit, just to add a general ambience of light. Here. Okay, so we have the general shape of the light, but it's still a little digital. And now the secret sauce, I think, for making it quite realistic, is to add a bit of shimmering. And so from the original, let's see here, from the original coordinates, we can use this. We can pull it into a noise texture. And if we preview that with Control-Shift-Left click, you'll see it's spiky, right? It becomes spiky in all different directions. Now, this map range clamps the coordinate system, so let's actually do the Z component right as it is, raw. That'll do it all around, so we're not limited in any way. And to determine the size of this, let's zoom in a little bit. And first, let's determine the scale. And the scale is going to be like the large scale variation. And so then we set the roughness down to 0, which means that the detail slider, here, let me show you, I'll slide that around, it does nothing, right? So we just see the large scale. And that's going to be the biggest the biggest frequency variation that you want on your light. And for me, that's going to be around a 2 or a 3, I think. Like a 3? Yeah, a 3. Now let's pull the roughness slider all the way to the right. Now we don't see the big scale, we see just the little details. That's going to be how small are the details in the detail slider. Let's pull that up until we don't want it any more detail. And if we go too far with this, right? I don't know if you can tell with the YouTube compression and stuff. I'll zoom in a little bit. We get this banding, which just, it doesn't look very nice. So you want to be restrained with this. I'll pull this back. And let's see, I think for me something like 2.5 maybe. That's gonna be nice. And to mix between the large scale and the small scale, we'll use the roughness slider, right? All the way to the left is large, all the way to the right is small. And I personally like somewhere around 0.5, I think. 0.5 is good. And then I'll shift right click to add a reroute there, bring this all the way to the end of the node graph, and control shift right click between these if you have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, and mix these together using soft light. And that's going to make it brighter where it's above mid-gray and darker where it's below mid-gray, so you're going to not change the overall brightness that much. Now you can see, if I pull this all the way to the left, we have the basic shape that we made. Let's make that more defined. Something like that. And now if we add the shimmering, just pull this slider to the right. And that's beautiful. I'll show you the before and after. Just adds that level of detail for realism. Okay, how did I learn how to make this? Most of the advanced techniques I know in Blender I learned from other, more specialized software. And I used Substance Designer for years, and that's what taught me these kind of techniques. Now, if you want to learn the gold nuggets from other programs that are applicable to Blender, I actually have a playlist for that on my channel page. You should go check it out. Now, okay, we're missing a couple of key factors. This is not as realistic as it could get. We still want more realistic light settings. Well, let's add back the emission shader here, and we'll pull this into the strength. Let's add a math node set to multiply just so we can control that strength still. The multiply value will now be how strong is our light, basically. So I'll set it to 1 to begin with. And now to choose a color for the light, we actually have a node to choose natural light colors. We can pull it out, and it's called black body. Black body corresponds to Kelvin values of lights, and 1500 like this corresponds to something like a candlelight. And if we pull that up to say 8000, that's going to be more like the blue sky at noon. So a natural like indoor light, which this will probably be used for, is going to be around 4500. And that's a beautiful looking, like slightly warm temperature light. And I teased this at the beginning, but as you can see now, if I press, I'll show you. So go into the tools, into the rotate tool, this light is not rotatable, right? I do stuff and nothing happens. It's because of the coordinate system. We can fix it, there's a workaround, I'll show you how. All we need to do is to go into the object properties of this light. And here, when I rotate, you'll see the rotation sliders. Here, I'll increase the display scale. You can see it a little better. When I rotate this, you'll see the rotation values changing. But that doesn't affect the normal coordinates. But it can do using drivers. All we have to do is right-click on rotation X. We go down to copy as new driver. It's really easy. We go here into the coordinate system. We add a mapping node. And we paste that driver onto the X rotation. And let's do that same thing for the other ones as well. Paste driver, copy driver, paste driver. And now, when we rotate this around, we can see the result on the light. Okay, so now you know how I made this node. So there's really no reason for me to charge for it. You can just go to my Gumroad and download it for free. Now, okay, let's push this past reality and make a light that no one's ever seen before. Now, so we've mapped light along the object's normal coordinates like this. But can we map light across like this? Would I ask if we couldn't? Of course not. That can be done using the light path node. And the ray length here corresponds to how far away from the light a surface is hit by that light. So at this point it's going to be around 0, and up here it's going to be around 2, right? Let's pull out the ray length. And in fact, I want to multiply this by a constant light fall off. If I preview this, everything turns white. This has now become a laser in all directions. But I will map range it to clamp that from 0 to 1 to 0 to 1. And then ramp it. Now this ramp here, this can make some pretty funky looking effects. And in fact here, if we pull this map range into a modulo, that can make that effect more automated for us. And this we can of course mix into what we had previously. Again, say using a, this time let's use a multiply. No, let's go with soft light. And that's an interesting effect. It's not like most lights I see. And to change the hue of the light to a less natural color, we can use the same coordinate system as, let's now use this node, the map range node, and pull it into a ramp. And this can control the light hue, right? So if we pull this into the emission color right here, now it goes from black to white, which is not very interesting, but we can make a nice color spectrum, right? We can go, say, from blue at the end, right here, to, say, a nice looking red. And instead of interpolating between them just linearly, we can change the color space from RGB to HSV. And we can interpolate with, let's say far. No, near makes more sense. What's happening now is that it looks at this color wheel and it goes around the edge until it gets to the other color. So you can make a really cool light spectrum like this. And that does not look like any light I've seen. So, okay, why do I call this level 3? It's obviously nonsense. I think we're moving into a new era of computer graphics. We've nailed photorealism, right? That's under control. What really interests me now is what we can do in the computer that we can't do anywhere else, right? These things that I've never seen before. That's what fascinates me at the moment. So if you know of any of those effects and how to make them in Blender, please leave them in the comments. I love this stuff.